Good evening and welcome to the July meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee. Councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phones or electronic device on silent if they have one near them, and those present in the room should face forward, speak directly into their microphones and not place papers or electronic devices between themselves and the microphones. Please would remote participants mute microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and save bandwidth to prevent loss of connection. Members of the Council and any independent persons joining us remotely should leave their cameras on. Officers leave cameras on only for the agenda item you are speaking to. After each item has been presented, members and independent persons present in the room will be invited to ask questions first. Those members and independent persons joining us remotely will then be invited to speak, and they should indicate that they wish to do so by using the Raise Your Hand facility. Only those members of the Audit and Standards Committee present in the room will be making the decisions, and the result will be confirmed verbally for the benefit of those watching the webcast. Thank you. And agenda item 1. The minutes of the last meeting. Do I have your agreement to sign them as a correct record? Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Agenda item 2, apologies for absence.
Councillor Thomas and the Deputy Chief Executive.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, any additional agenda items?
No, Chair, there are none.
Thank you. And item 4, disclosures of interest. Councillor Barnes.
For the sake of transparency, although I don't think it even amounts to a personal interest, I am a director of the Rother District Council Housing Company, but I am advised that I can speak on the council's functions in regard to that company.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Any more? Thank you. Moving on then to agenda item 5, and Mr. Johnston, please. Sorry, I should say it's a review of the Constitution, Part 3, Responsibility for Functions, recommendations of the Constitution Review Steering Group. Mr. Johnston.
Thank you, Chair. As members may be aware, the responsibility for the Constitution has moved from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to the Audit and Standards Committee, hence why this report is with you this evening. Members will recall, and those that were on the meetings will certainly recall, that we had very lengthy discussions about the Constitution and went through this very, very, very carefully and very, very closely. The main points are listed in the report itself, and it was really looking at the responsibilities of each committee, and this particular part of it is actually looking at the responsibilities of each committee. You will notice that there is a new committee being proposed, the Human Resources Committee, which takes that function away from licensing and general purposes, and I think gives it a degree of clarity that was perhaps lost among the L&GP function. So I'm happy to take any questions that members might have. Some of this has been sent to legal, hasn't it, Louise? So there may be sort of some minor adjustments, but given that this was based on either a combination of our existing or suggestions from other authorities, I don't anticipate those will be anything substantial. And just to remind members that the purpose of the constitutional review was probably it made some of us read it from cover to cover, which is not something you do normally, because normally you go to look for a specific item within it. And actually that exercise in itself was quite useful, because it does bring things to your attention that you wouldn't otherwise see. But it was mainly to introduce more clarity and make it easier to read for anybody looking for any information. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Councillor Courtell.
Thank you, Chair. If I could ask Mr. Johnson, about the employer's side function of the local staff joint committee, which apparently no longer exists. It's on page 4 of the bundle of papers, page 2 of the report. I just wasn't aware that it no longer existed, and is there any way of communicating with the staff side what replaces it?
Sorry, Chair, I can't find the reference that Councillor Cortell's referring to. Chair, if I may, yes. It hasn't existed for some time. I mean, it's not just since this review of the Constitution. It hasn't existed for some time. There are various mechanisms in place where, I mean, I meet on a monthly basis with Unison staff side, but that committee hasn't existed for, well, I've been here for 14 years and I'm not aware it's existed over that period of time.
Percentage of staff are members of Unison?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know, and I wouldn't like to give you a figure because it will either be out of date. I don't have a recent figure.
So, is there any other group that you consult other than Unison over pay?
We also have there's Unison and staff side. The main difference between the two is Unison as a trade union can represent individual members. We also have staff side. It can represent staff in general, but it can't represent individual members in the same way that the trade union do.
Thank you very much for that. Can I move on to my next question, Chair?
Yes, carry on.
Thank you. I notice there are substantial additions under Planning Committee, quite considerable new terms of information. I know that at the Constitution meeting, Constitution Steering Group, Councillor Vine Hall wasn't present because it was done in the committee room and the hybrid facility wasn't available. Has he had a chance to be consulted on this?
Yes, he has. I spoke to him this afternoon on it. Yes, he has. And he has put in a suggestion which will go forward with the legal advice. The legal advice has gone in. He suggested one minor amendment, just in the order of the words, and that's going to go to legal as well.
Thank you so much, Chair. The only other point I've got is there are a couple of typos where I'm sure another word was meant. I don't want to waste the committee's time with this. Can I pass them on to Louise, or do you want to hear them?
Yes. I think I found one that said "and" instead of "any."
Yes.
But yes,
that's one of my
by all means, send them in separately. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor John Barnes.
I think the Chief Executive has partly answered this already. But the wording of recommendation 2 has worried a number of parish councils on my patch because it's drawn so widely. The Chief Executive has already made clear this is about minor amendments in the light of legal advice, but I think it's as well if somebody could just look at that wording to make that absolutely clear. I've reassured my parish councils, but if they're worried, I'm sure one or two others will be worried as well.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Barnes. I mean, it is specifically on the legal advice that's in the paper. But yes, Mr. Johnston.
Councillor Barnes, as part of the discussion, will recall that one of the things we looked at doing was, and that gets the Constitution out of date very quickly, is the minute you mention specific legislation, it immediately gets it. If that legislation is amended in any way, shape or form, technically the Constitution is out of date. What we have done for other parts of the Constitution is as far as possible, sort of just made it more general, so that if you consider areas like where Joe has his areas, there's a plethora of legislation. It just really refers to relevant legislation. The reason that we're not sure we can do that is because and part of the advice is, do we need to mention all of it in planning because of the slightly different nature of planning? So it isn't that you're granting me delegation to decide that what I would actually like to see in there rather than what is in there. It would have to be within the spirit of the confines of the legal advice on, do we need all of this? If we don't, how can we word it differently?
Very grateful for that, Chairman. I think that makes the record absolutely clear.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Any other? No? In that case, recommendation to Council is as in the paper. We approve and adopt these amendments, proposed amendments. The Chief Executive be granted delegated authority to amend the Planning Committee functions in light of the legal advice received. There's a new Human Resources Committee to be scheduled to meet twice per year, April and October. And just to mention there that something else that's been measured, that's scheduled to meet. It can meet more often, more frequently if it needs to, but it's scheduled for April and October. The licence in general purpose, therefore, goes down to 3 times a year because it's lost its human resources function. And the new committee be made up on a political balance with the group leaders being asked. All those in favour? Oh, sorry. I need someone to propose it. I think I know that. Councillor Courtell and seconded by Councillor John Barnes. Thank you. All those in favour? Those against? Abstaining?
So, Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
Yes.
I was only going to say, if we're talking about April and October, could I just ask officers to ensure that it doesn't clash with school holidays? Because obviously you have Easter holidays in April and half-term holidays in October. And I don't think I'm the only one with school-age children, but I do find often that meetings tend to clash with school holidays. So I'd only ask, I know Easter moves, but it would be really helpful maybe if we could just check that they don't clash with Easter holidays, given there'll only be 2 a year and they both could do in effect.
Thank you. It's been noted because, let's face it, it's one of the things we need to be doing to make more people become councillors. Thank you. So that was council. So agenda item 6. The Rother District Council Housing Company Governance Monitoring. Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Chair. And just to introduce the report for you, just to be clear for members that my role in the meeting today is as COO of the housing company, and Mr. Johnston is in his role as shareholder representative. Just to make that clear for you all, and I'll come on to the governance arrangements and the reasons for it being important to make those distinctions clear to ourselves and to you this evening. So the report before you provides an update on the governance arrangements of the housing company itself, as well as an overview, an update of the council's arrangements for the governance of its housing company. So the important document to draw your attention to is the local authority company review guidance produced by local partnerships last year, 2021. A link to which is in the report, and a recommendation that councillors do familiarise themselves with sections 1 to 4 of that report, if they've the time. But it's a useful background reading for the function of the housing company and the council's relationship and interface with its company and how that's best achieved. So the purpose, to summarise, of governance arrangements in this context is to ensure that the housing company is allowed to fulfil its reason for being, so that's to achieve its objectives and to operate in a commercial capacity, while the Council has enough control to ensure that its investments are protected, the returns on investments can be secured, and it's actively keeping an eye on, really, it's the strategic objectives it has set the company through a key document that determines that in the company business plan, which references to previous reports on the company business plan that have been approved by Cabinet and Council in their report. Appendix 1 provides for you an overview of the present structure as it is, in terms of the interface and the resourcing on both sides, and some indications within the report about the strengths and weaknesses of the present arrangements and the risks involved. I personally have been conducting a review since taking on this role in January this year, and it became apparent to me that we needed a more detailed review, and have instructed and recruited a more experienced and person who's worked with a number of housing companies, a consultant externally, to provide a more a position appraisal and a more detailed review of the governance arrangements, which we hope to be concluded in August this year. Appendix 2 provides nothing more really than the sum of my research into this, which I've been doing between operational priorities to date. So it's providing really largely informed by that local partnerships report. It is a point in time to be here before you and to be open and transparent in terms of the governance we hope to achieve. It's still subject to further refinement and input from the review, the consultant conducting the review, of course, further guidance from the shareholders, from other stakeholders, including company people who around this who have valid input, I'm sure, and ultimately can inform the shareholder and the shareholder's representative, whose decision ultimately is to determine how the company is governed. So we have developed an issues and risk log, and I've highlighted in the report the elements of that relating to governance in the main report, and members can see that there as well in the report. So to conclude, really, we are reviewing presently, and it's important, the timing of this report is as it is, and we're at this point in time, and this is nothing more than a point in time showing you where we are at this present time. And it's important that the governance of the company is that we get that right, and we continue to evolve it and refine it, so that the company is able to perform in a commercial environment, and also that the council protects its investments. So, as I say, we late summer this year, we should have a more detailed review, and we hope to be able to provide, by the shareholder representative, a more comprehensive structure and interface between the two entities. I don't know if Malcolm would like to add anything to what I've said.
I was just going to say, I apologise, because I should have gone to Mr Johnson first, because I put you in that position, because you are here tonight as the Chief Operating Officer of the company, whereas Mr Johnson is here as the council representative, as it were. So, sorry, Malcolm.
No, that's fine, Chair. Thank you, Joe, for that. I think the important bit is that this is a point-in-time report. The outcome of the reviews that we're having will be reported both to the company board, because they need to take a view on it, and also we will look to bring a report back to this committee so that you can form a view on it. At this point in time, we're not saying these are, as Joe has rightly said, these are the governance arrangements as we stand. That is not to say that will continue into the future, and we need to give consideration to that. I would it's getting the balance, and this is why I think we need an external support for this, between a company that is a standalone company in many ways, a non-contracting company, and must be able to operate to an extent free of the council, but at least be seen to be operating in that way. But obviously, it is the council as the sole shareholder, so it has some quite a high degree of interest in how the company is managing its governance, and also what is the appropriate level of evidence that we should be looking for from the company to assure you, as an audit committee that's responsible for the governance of the council, that work is being done. So I think Joe's covered the main points, but either Joe or I'll try and answer any questions, but I may have to look to Joe and for more detailed answers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mary Barnes.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I don't quite know where to start because we have lived with this housing company for 2 years. I think it was 2020 that it was first envisaged. Mind you, it was part of a plan which was before 2019. And that plan was to allow a housing company to act completely independently of the council. What I see here is a plan to make it even more complicated and bring more members of sections of the council into it. And I have some questions about where we are actually with the contract that we have for this for this company. For example, are we registered at Company House? Do we file our accounts at Company House? All those things that I would think should be part of a company, are they in existence? Do we have anybody who is in overall control? I think it's called a person of significant control. Do we have one of those? It just seems to me, and I've just been watching this really from the sidelines, because obviously, as my husband explained, he is a director of the company. It doesn't seem to be making any progress at all, because I think it's hampered by the number of people who are involved in it. It seems to me that what we need is to allow a lot more independence instead of a lot more control. And we need to put somebody in control of it who really has experience with running a company of this sort. I hear what Joe's saying, but I don't think that we have got anybody who is actually so totally au fait with how this is run that it's actually being run correctly. And I don't mean in any way that I'm denigrating anything that's happened. I think we simply do not have enough experience. Going back pre-2019, I can remember saying to Ben Hook, well, surely you're going to be able to do this in-house. And he said, we simply haven't got the expertise. And I really remember what he said at that time. But, we don't, having a shareholder, who, you referred to shareholders in the plural. Who are the shareholders? What is, where's the nitty-gritty about the whole thing? We need to have much more clear-cut definition of how this is going to operate before we can get anywhere near approving it. So this is purely my feeling, having had a couple of years of frustration of listening to my husband and the chairman and everybody else saying, when are we going to get on with this? Have we signed any contracts? What are we doing? We're 2 years to this point. And I think we need a few more answers than have been given to us tonight.
Yes, Mr. Johnston.
If I leave something out, Councillor Mrs. Barnes, no doubt you will remind me I've left it out. So that, but I mean, in short, to some of the answer, yes, we are registered at Companies House. The person of significant control is Rother District Council as a corporate body, so that bit is there. Actually, I would actually agree with some of the comments you've made, and actually the work we're doing now in the review is partially because Joe has recognised that in the work he has carried out, that we don't have the expertise to go into it, and we will have the expertise. And it's not about, we have to be very careful with housing companies because they are separate companies and we must give them enough leash to actually operate. But also, we have a responsibility because we are the sole shareholder. We are lending them the money, which is public money. So therefore, we need to be satisfied that they have the arrangements in place. So the reviews that are going on are very much looking at making sure we've got the right skills and identifying those skills on the board, because actually we're now at the point where the activities of the company are about to ratchet up very significantly and to a very large level. So we've recognised that. That's why those reviews are going on. They will be complete, as Joe said. Probably we're looking at towards the end of August as being the date we'll have that. And then we can make sure that we have the right people, the right skills, actually it's the right skills, the right people, and the right environment for the company to operate with freedom and move forward. And a lot of the information, I'm not sure that it's not that it wasn't in terms of contracts and etc. I think we've given that information before, but I'll leave that to Joe. I'm not sure whether it's been in the previous reports.
Thank you. There is a need for us to have an arrangement between the council and the company in terms of a service level agreement. And we are behind where we would like to be with the formation of that document. It is with Trowers and Hamlin presently who are finalising that document. But we have an arrangement which I hope is captured in Appendix A as an indication of the arrangements, and we are, to reassure you, meeting regularly with officers of the council in Tony Bagan's team and the Chief Finance Officer's team, and with members of the estates team to make sure that we are, it's open, and I'm sure Tony will back me up on this, is an open book arrangement, and that we are, open and transparent, as Malcolm says. It's a delicate balance to achieve. We do need to operate with a degree of commercial confidentiality, as any commercial entity would expect. So we're limited in terms of what we can share operationally in a public forum such as this. But in terms of our governance arrangements, and to give you an indication of the level of scrutiny that is provided of our shareholder, because this is public money ultimately, and we take that very seriously. And so does our Section 1.5, the Council's Section 151 officer. So, yes, we have, I think, the right substance to what we're doing. It's in terms of the interface and that the appendices that you see before you in the report. There is more refinement to be done in terms of articulating those structures so that the flow is more of this information, and the structure around it is more intuitive and less challenging for those in positions where they're having to twin hat essentially between different functions.
Councillor Mrs. Barnes.
Back and say, in the business plan, is there anything about a time span before the company will be able to stand alone? And at that point, how do you envisage the whole thing running? Because at the moment it looks very hands-on with everybody's teams, which was not what I was expecting to find. But just how is it going to be to your satisfaction when the thing is actually up and running properly?
The chairman of the company, Richard Thomas, is keen for me to communicate as well that the intention is to have a dedicated professional at the head of this, with the relevant experience, expertise and knowledge, to be a direct employee of the company. And that's the plan. And I would like to be achieving that. The time frame I've indicated in terms of the review outcome is soon, and that's deliberate because I would like this to be happening in fairly short order. The short answer is soon, and as soon as possible, really. In order to, and we have been working since January, really, to get to this point where we have been conducting a review, and just to reassure you of the calibre of individual, a professional who is conducting that review for us and reviewing the company activities. He's worked with a number of local authority housing companies. He's a former director of a very large registered provider and development director. So I'm confident that with that knowledge and expertise, we're in very good hands and can set us up beyond the next few months.
Are you saying then very shortly is what, by the autumn, by Christmas? When will it be ready to go?
If I may, Chair?
Yes.
My only hesitancy is the outcome of the review. So I would like to see the outcome of the review before giving any sort of surety, but we have requested as part of the scope of this work that this happen promptly, and I imagine before the intention is before the end of this calendar year to have something. I'm looking at the shareholder representative, but I wouldn't like to be held to that without seeing the outcome of the review, but that's where we're intending to be.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Did you want to add anything, Mr. Johnson? If not, I'll go to Councillor John Barnes and then Councillor Allen. Okay, Councillor John Barnes.
Yes, I think I should begin by repeating the fact that I am a director of the company. I should like to say my wife's views are her own and not the result of internal household discussions. I sometimes have to resist questions on the grounds of commercial sensitivity. I'm not going to comment on the company itself and how that operates. That is something which is, for me as a member of the board rather than a member of this committee. I do want to say one or two things about the relationship, not least because it will have to evolve over time, because if this company is successful, then its finance will no longer be 100% provided by the council, but they will generate sums of money which they will presumably redeploy in accordance with the objectives set for them by the shareholder. So what we're looking at now is not what will be there if the company is successful. The risks are, of course, extremely large at the moment. As the conclusion says, we're a very new entity, and the first major project that has been handed to the company is, of course, one which has not been furthered for, well, more years than I can remember, and probably predates the chief executive. There are good reasons for that, but obviously they do mean that this is a marginally viable project rather than one where we would ideally have started. There are other projects in mind which are a rather different order. The crucial thing we have to avoid is drifting into the status of a company that is controlled by the council, because then we will be what is called a tackle company rather than a non-contracting company. I don't find those two terms at all helpful. I accept them because they're used in the jargon of the trade, but I have no idea what a tackle company actually, where did tackle come from? Presumably it was a failed entity. And non-contracting, when we will be entering into contracts, seems to me, again, an unhelpful description. But to my mind, and I'm less worried about the current situation, where it's handled largely as if it was another corporate project, which, of course, until the Cabinet takes certain decisions, it will continue to be. I'm more worried about looking at the forward look. At the moment, there are weekly meetings between the officers of the company and the officers of the council. That seems to me entirely appropriate at the moment, but clearly that will not be appropriate to an independent company going forward. I don't like the term company management committee. It seems to me that implies more control in its language than actually is envisaged. Fundamentally, the relationship should be that the shareholder sets the objectives and the company decides how best to deliver those objectives. And then there should be appropriate monitoring of the company's success or failure in doing that. And clearly at the moment the risks are high and therefore more scrutiny is necessary. It's probably right that this is not undertaken by the Cabinet itself, but by a body delegated authority by the Cabinet. Sorry, I said company, I meant Cabinet. So I think it's not the concept of the Company Management Committee that worries me, but the naming of it. And obviously, there are three ways in which we need to look at this. There is the performance against objectives, and that is clearly for oversight, overview and scrutiny. There is governance, which is properly, I think, with this body. But the other one, which slightly worries me, is financial performance and indeed financial risks, which are high. And I think that should actually be within the competence of this committee as well as governance. Because we look at the risk register, it seems to me this is an appropriate body. How we do it, given that at the moment there are directors of the company on this body, we discussed at some length at an earlier meeting, and it's probably appropriate we create a subcommittee in order to do that. But it does seem to me that in B, periodic governance reviews, which is what's defined as the role of audit and standards, probably is an insufficient description. I do take, through you, Chairman, the COO's remarks very seriously indeed. This is a document riddled with mites and cans, because neither side have actually taken formal decisions. So my remarks are really, in a sense, putting down some markers rather than actually making firm recommendations.
And I'm sure those markers have been noted. Thank you. I have seen you, Mr. Farmer. I've got Councillor Langlands.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I think some of the points probably have been covered off by both Councillor Bonses. But my question, Joe, to you is the staffing compromising progress? The people involved at the moment, is that delaying how it has taken so long, as Councillor Barnes said? Is this because of the nature of the setup and the involvement of the council, or therefore do you need to step away with different staffing structure, or do you think that it's going to dovetail and it's going to work well?
If I may, Chair. Yeah. I think that it's there are two sides to this. So there's the council's resourcing of itself in order to adequately oversee and scrutinise what the company does, and then there's the resourcing of the company itself. Now, the company has a council approval for its own resourcing in the business plan. My assessment of the resource levels is relatively adequate. So the number of resource, the amount of resource, it's more the knowledge and expertise of those in those positions. And and I've been fairly open in the report, I think, about my own knowledge and expertise and the need for that. We need to add to those. So it's more about the knowledge and expertise than the number of officers in the company. On the council side, there's some thought, as Councillor Barnes indicates, some thought is needed to how that's resourced going forward and what level of scrutiny the council and the shareholder representative wants of its company, because that will have resource implications on the council side. But this is all part of what with the review, and again, sorry to sort of make the same point on everything I say. But once we know the outcome of the review, we'll be in a much better place to give you a more comprehensive answer.
Thank you. Mr Johnson wants to come in.
Yeah, just to add to what Joe said, I mean, the purpose of the review is A, to look at the company, but B, to also look at what is good practice in other companies and what they have done, because we're not going into uncharted territory here in terms of what local government has done. And actually, sometimes it is important to look at what caused other issues in other companies, because when these companies do well, you hear nothing about them at all. When they go wrong, it's the sort of thing that makes the front page of the news and certainly makes private eye. So it's not sure that that's sort of, it should be in the same sentence, but it is. So, I mean, what we're trying to do is, this is, as Councillor John Barnes has rightly said, I mean, this has been an evolving situation. The first project that the company took on was probably the largest project it could take on. It's a project that actually, I think Councillor Barnes predates many chief executives, because it was, I understand this land was first bought in 1967. It's sat there as a development site, and that tells you something about it. We've been through various iterations of developers looking at it and falling away. It is a difficult site. We will deliver it, but what we want to make sure we deliver, and from the Section 151 officer's perspective, he will want to be absolutely sure that the public money we're putting into this, delivers what the council's aims and objectives are. And I actually, I would concur with a lot of the comments that Councillor John Barnes made about, the need to carefully consider this, to give a degree of freedom, but also to give us as a council, because although I'm on there as the shareholders' representative, I would stress the word representative. I am not the shareholder. The council is the shareholder, and it needs to be satisfied that its money is being well used, and we need to look at how the governance of that actually pans out in practice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Am I right in thinking then it predates Rother District Council? Yes. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Kirby-Green, then I'll come to Mr Farmer.
Oh, thank you. It was just, I think some of my questions have been answered, to be honest. So I just heard, I was a bit confused as to why we're at this point now. And I think I understand it's because Joe was given the role in January. He then took a look at it, and he's reached the point where he thinks that there need to be some changes. So I think I'm correct there. And this is, so forgive me if I'm asking silly questions. This is a suggestion. So that what we've got in front of us, this suggested governance, that's not necessarily the final one. That's just where we are at the moment, in that we think we're there. And then the other question I had is that, so I think, Joe, you said about we need someone with a lot of experience. So is that going to be one of the two independent non-execs? Because it says in the new membership, it says, and second question, sorry, and again, I should probably know this. So at the moment, we don't have anyone independent sitting on the board. We just have the councillors. Is that correct?
If I may, probably answering in reverse order. Yes, that's correct. The expertise that we need is both the independent non-executives. It's important we bring people on with the relevant expertise in that area, but it's equally important if you look at other council housing company setups. The chief operating officer role is usually an experienced development professional who's used to this sort of thing. What we need to do is to make sure we get the right skills on board, the right people, so that we can drive this company forward. And I think, completing the reverse order, Councillor Kirby-Green, if I may, that is the document. Joe again will correct me if I'm wrong, but that's a sort of model document produced by local partnerships. Is it based on that? I'll let Joe take that.
Thank you. Yeah. It's really it's a point. The committee has wanted to see a governance update, and this is where we are. And it's meant to reflect my current thinking, and I hope it's presented like that in the report.
Right.
On what it's a mixture of things. It's partly the local partnership document that's referenced in the document. I've also been in conversations with a number of local authority housing company managing directors and COOs and chairs, just open, peer-to-peer support conversations about how they're structured, and also informed by legal advice, just to give a general picture, really, of what it might look like. But the specifics of the number of non-executive directors, for example, or the skills of those non-executive directors, or the role of council officers in the board, and that sort of thing, is all to be refined and defined to our needs.
Thank you. So just to clarify, we would have a number of non-execs, but independent non-execs with actual relevant experience. And then we'd have a chief operating officer. So that's you at the moment. So we would recruit someone externally to fill that role with experience. Because to be honest with you, at the moment, we've got this mega housing authority, and with no disrespect to the councillors, I don't think any of them have run housing companies before. You've never done anything like this. So in some ways, it's quite concerning that up until this point, we've been running along with quite a lack of knowledge. As I say, that's no detriment to anyone specifically, but I certainly wouldn't know what I was doing if I was on this. So my only thoughts are about cost, because presumably right at the beginning, this was going to be run. Well, presumably do we have any budget? I mean, do we know? Because presumably, if we're going to recruit a chief operating officer who knows what they're doing and has got experience, that's going to cost money. We're spending money now on a review. So who's tracking the budgets for this? And again, sorry if that's a really stupid question, I should know that, but I don't quite understand how we know whether we're still going to make money if we recruit in someone on a six-figure salary. I'm not really sure how it works, and whether we get to see that, or who's sort of keeping the accounts.
Thank you. No such thing as a stupid question. Mr. Powell.
I'll probably leave the financing question to others, but in terms of the expertise around this, we have a number of we have an employer's agent, for example, and a very experienced employer's agent employed to support us with the development. We also have a project management consultant who, again, very experienced, have delivered schemes of this size many, many times. And in most latterly, we now have the input and expertise of our consultant who is advising us on how we move forward. So we have been surrounded with relevant knowledge and expertise throughout. It's really about the company having that leadership function in a committee, full-time person with those knowledge and expertise. In terms of the financing, that's in the business plan. It indicates how the company the company shares. I forget the approval at the moment. I think it's council approved, 300,000 for that. But I'll let Tony come in on the detail of the financing. Sorry.
Mr. Baden, over to you.
Talk about a sideways pass. Sorry, I don't. I think it's 100,000 shares we've got, but I stand to be corrected on that. Sorry, to try and pick up on Councillor Kirby Green's point about the budgets and the finances. The company side of the council's accounts and the company's accounts are kept separately. We've even got a different bit of software for the council. For the company's accounts. And we have a resource from my team that's been seconded, in inverted commas, to the company. So those functions are separated, rightly so, and the overall cost of the company, including how much it has to sells the houses for, and all the other, the cost of the contract of carrying out the building, and et cetera, all those costs will need to be reported by the company's accountant at some point in time. One point I've kind of been itching to make for a while is about, from the council side, I can't speak too much from the company side, obviously, but from the council side, and picking up on a point that's been made by several people around the table here tonight, we've also have invested in resource, and we're budgeting for that resource. It wasn't originally budgeted, but we are managing within existing budgets, if you like. We've also have an experienced finance resource, a former Section 151 officer who's more importantly had prior experience of dealing with council housing companies, or council-owned companies. So we're managing that cost within within the overall council budget. So I think we have the right balance of skills and experience there. She's an absolute first-class appointment as far as I'm concerned. It's a bit of a strange situation because whilst we, as Joe is at pains to stress many times over, I suspect, the council and the company we have to be treated separately, but in a sense we are on the same team at the moment, and the relationship will evolve over time, and it will, as Councillor Barnes made the point earlier on. The relationship as it stands now will most certainly change as time goes by, and we will need to be more cognizant of that fact. I hope I've covered Councillor Kirby-Green's points about finances.
Yeah, thank you. And just one last question, if I may. As far as I can see, the new structure, which I know is not the definite structure, but it's the sort of way you're thinking, will mean that there's more involvement from elected members than there currently is. Could you just confirm that my thinking is correct?
Mr. Johnson.
I come back to the point that I said earlier, that it is very important that the council, the elected members, are the shareholders. It is not me. I am the shareholders' representative. So the short answer, Councillor Kirby-Green, is yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Farmer.
Yes, I haven't observed this quite as long as Councillor Barnes is, but ever since I took this role on, this committee has been asking questions about this company and the structure and the governance and the role of the audit committee. And a year or so on, I don't see us that much further along. As people have said, it's very high risk. You're talking about a huge chunk of the company's money, the biggest housing project the council ever been involved in, and yet I get the impression that the management of this has just not been grasped. My career has been in industry as managing companies. I also sat as the governor of Hastings College when we built the new Sussex Coast College by the station, and I sat on the Capital Projects Committee that managed that. And the role of managing a build like that, even where we had a main contractor, is still very complex. So I have great concerns as to where you are, and what I hear now is, well, we have plans to get it in the right position, but you seem still a long way from it. You certainly need independent people on that board with the right skills. I would think more than two. You probably want at least three to cover the various aspects you'll need. I think it's not clear at all what the role of this committee is. Councillor Barnes has mentioned the idea of a subcommittee. I think many meetings ago that was raised and has not been taken forward. So I don't clearly see what the audit committee, there's no clarity of what this committee is going to do to manage this. It is very high risk. It ought to be on the risk register as a major risk. I'm not sure it is because we're waiting to see the new risk register. And that would be a vehicle to look more closely at what's going on. And secondly, I think that internal audit ought to be given a role as soon as possible to look at how it is operating today and whether there are gaps between the council's role, the new company's role, and whether it could fall between stools. I just get this feeling of horses bolting and sheds being shut, that maybe the danger is it could be too late. Because if it went pear-shaped tomorrow and there was an investigation, I think the council would find itself in great difficulty to explain how it all went wrong. I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but that's how I feel from my experience.
Mr. Johnston?
You probably expect me to say this, but I can accept the perspective. We had changed the role. We brought in Joe to do it. Joe very quickly has identified the risks that are associated, and none of us underestimate those risks. None of us want to be on, justifying why this has gone wrong. This will not go wrong. This will deliver the houses we need and that we've specified. Whether we can deliver to the very original plan, that's something that we're looking at. But I mean, we need to be keeping a very close eye on this. The main bit that should give members reassurance is that there is not a hope anywhere of me getting agreement from the Section 151 officer to actually transfer anything to the company without the assurance that it is the council's money isn't. I was going to say it isn't at risk. This is a risky project, and we need to identify that. And Mr. Farmer's quite right to highlight that it is a very high risk project. It's probably, if I may say, one of the most, if not the most high risk project this council has undertaken. But again, we need to come back to the objectives we set the company, and one of those objectives was to increase the supply of housing, and the only way it can do it is actually by delivering them. I would say that, and it's probably splitting hairs, that there is not a plan to do something, there is actually an intention to do something, and it is underway at this point in time, and as Joe said, we will have that. You're quite right. The role of this committee, I think, is still unclear. It is to look at governance, but what is the remit of governance? And that needs to be defined, and that needs to be discussed. And but it is not the role of this council to operate this company. But this council is an arm's length company, and it must be an arm's length company, or else we defeat the purpose of setting it up. I take Mr. Farmer's points, and I have every confidence that we will be able to reassure you before a brick is. I was going to say laid. Thank you very much. I was going to say brick is built, but brick is laid. Thank you, Councillor Harmer.
Could I just ask an answer to the two specific questions? Will this appear as a major item on the risk register that this committee looks at? And secondly, will we have an internal audit investigation into the operation of the company within this year?
Will appear on the risk register. I'm saying that because it is rewritten and without having it in front of me, but it would seem rather odd that it would do so. I'm less clear at the reasons, and I'm happy to have a discussion as why internal audit should get involved in something at this point in time, but I'm happy to have a discussion with Mr. Farmer to understand that, and I'm sure Joe would be happy to join in that discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Maybold.
Given that we've had certain assurances, but given that I'm also far from sure that we haven't at the moment any governance arrangements, could I suggest that we remove this as a resolution for tonight, but ask that it's brought back when we are able to hear of what the plan will be to deliver the project?
If I may, just that it is not that there are no governance arrangements. There are governance arrangements. This council operates within governance arrangements and can't operate outside of that. So there are governance arrangements. And in answer to your second question, yes, I'd be very happy to bring it back, so that you can see what the outcome of those reviews. Way forward.
Councillor Gortel.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to move a different motion from Councillor Barnes, which was that we form a subcommittee. We resolve this evening to form a subcommittee which excludes the directors of the housing company in order to have the necessary supervision, or perhaps that's the wrong word, the necessary periodic governance reviews to be able to carry out our role as an audit committee.
Yes, Mr. Johnson.
Chairman, I would suggest that is rather putting the cart before the horse in terms of the reviews that are being looked at. And I would remind, sorry, Councillor, could you turn this? I would remind members that it is this committee that is charged with governance. Yeah, now it can exercise that in a different way, but before going down a certain route, I would recommend that you take that, you have that discussion. If that's a discussion you wish to have, when you have seen the outcome, and how you as a committee decide that that this should be, you should exercise this committee's role to have an oversight of governance.
Thank you. Councillor Cortell.
Okay, in view of what the Chief Executive has said, I won't push that. I realise that there's a review by an extremely experienced person going on at the moment. I'd just like to ask, on the basis of the chart which appears after Appendix B in the report, it says there are two, it's proposed that there are two independent non-executive commercial people. Now, I think we need a slightly broader range of skills than just commercial people. And I think one area where we certainly need some expertise is in construction, development of an estate of houses. So I'm talking about a developer, stroke civil engineer, stroke builder, something in that broad area as a housing company board member.
Thank you. I think it's been explained that this is not like a tablet of stone. This is what's going to happen. This is Mr. Powell's sort of best guess using all the various bits that he's referred to. And we're waiting for the review because I suspect, I agree with you, and we can debate the meaning of the word commercial till the cows come home, but it's definitely non-council people who know what they're doing. But I'll hand over to Councillor Barnes.
I think, I would say quietly through you to Councillor Cortell, I think a decision for who are the non-executive and the number of non-executive is for the board and not the council.
Yes, indeed.
I'm merely making a suggestion. I was not trying to impose this on the housing company.
Yeah, thank you. But as I said, that's not the gospel, according to Joe Powell, anyway. It's up for changing. So thank you. Any more questions or comments? Councillor Mrs. Barnes, you were going to suggest something other than just what the motion was tonight, weren't you?
I thought it had been shot down in flames.
I mean, if it would assist
I know he's
in that, I would suggest that if members are happy that, I mean, I'd need to take advice from Joe that because the next meeting of this committee is on the 25th of September, whether that gives us time to get through the board. And but I think certainly members should look to have an update report on the 25th of September, the next meeting.
Yes, I was thinking
of
time.
I'm
thinking of that,
Joe to nod,
putting it into the work programme, because then after that it's December. But trying to fit it somewhere in our work programme this year, if you're hoping to have an answer this year.
It's something we can take away and discuss, because it's a very busy time for the company, and it is resource intensive getting reports up. So I just want to make sure we're in the right place to provide you with that sort of report.
Yeah, ideally at the next meeting, but yeah,
we will try.
Yeah. Thank you. So it resolved that we are noting that report. Someone to move that, please. Thank you. Seconded? It needs to be seconded, or do we just note it? Someone second with noting the report. Thank you, Councillor Maybe. Those in favour? Those against? Abstaining? Sorry, abstaining. Okay, so it was one against, 2 for, 1 against, and 2 abstentions. You abstaining, yeah? And you're abstaining. So, it's carried. Moving on to agenda item 7, the annual governance statement 2021-2022. Mr. Baden.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the annual governance statement, this is for the financial year 21-22. Members are asked to approve the statement to be signed off by the Leader of the Council and the Chief Executive. Just to give a little bit of background to members, and I apologise if this is already known to you, but just so make sure everyone's got a broad understanding of why we're doing this report. The annual governance statement is a statutory document, and it basically explains at a high level the processes and the procedures that the council has in place to enable it to carry out its functions effectively. Now, in years bygone, the inclusion of the annual governance statement was a statutory requirement for the statement of accounts. That's no longer the case. It's not an obligation now, but we do that anyway, and we'll continue to do so for the sake of transparency. So our statement is it's in the same format as in previous years, and demonstrates that the council is compliant with the governance framework that was developed by CIPFA and Solus, and underpinning the framework, if you like, there are about I think 6 or 7 principles which are laid out in Appendix A, and they're the underpin of good local authority governance, and we try to demonstrate that we comply with that. It's important because ultimately, and I'm sure members will know this, especially members of this committee, ultimately good governance defines outcomes and results and achievements of outcomes for the stakeholders. So it is an important document. It's quite dry. It's not the most exciting document, I guess, but it is important. So this report is an update of last year's statement. So there's a lot of, if you like, not repetition, but it's a lot of what's in the statement is what was in the statement last year and probably preceding years as well. And it does demonstrate that we have controls and procedures in place to provide members with that high level of assurance that they need, whilst also highlighting risks and required improvement. And the report, or the statement, does that as well. As I say, I won't go into every single bit, line by line of the report, but I'll just pick up on some of the highlights. Under Principle A, Lorna Ford is now imposed as the Deputy Chief Executive. I'm just going through the things that have changed from last year. So other things that have happened, the Council, Principle C and D, the Council has now got a fully approved corporate plan that was approved in July 2021, and progress on that plan is reported to Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Principle E touches on recruitment issues, and this sort of relates to a query, I guess, or a question that I had earlier in the day from Councillor Cortell. We have got recruitment issues. We know that's a problem for us. It is to answer your question you had, Councillor Cortell, about whether that's on our risk register. That risk register, as Malcolm said earlier in the evening, that's been developed, but it will be on our risk register with certain mitigations that we'll try to use to offset the problems caused by recruitment issues. And so, as I say, further work being carried out to embed risk management within the council, with work to improve officer awareness. That's already underway, and we've already commissioned the services of Zurich Municipal to help us along that path. Other things that have changed since last year, I had to get finance in there somewhere. Budget monitoring is now regularly reported to the senior leadership team on a monthly basis, and we continue to review the quality of our reporting as often as we can. And I think, as I said to Cabinet on Monday night, and I said to Scrutiny Committee before, we're looking now at our next step to improve that reporting process is to make sure that we give better capital programme reports back to members so that we can review the costs of capital projects on a project basis, on a lifespan project basis, rather than just the in-year budget. Internal Audit's overall opinion deemed our governance framework as adequate, as effective, and I think Gary Angel reported that to the last Audit Standards Committee. And the external audit value for money report was a largely positive report from Grant Thornton, and that was also reported to Audit and Standards Committee last time around, last June. So the new risks and weaknesses highlighted in the report, the government review of local government funding and business rates has again been delayed, and I think I've reported that previously to Overview and Scrutiny Committee and Cabinet. Again, just picking up on the point about staff recruitment, that's still a bit of an Achilles heel for the organisation. And the pandemic restrictions, they've now been fully lifted, but I think the impact still lives on to a certain extent. That's all I've got to say, Chair, and I'll try and take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Baden. Any questions? Councillor Lance.
Page, 38. I'm assuming we're back to the desktop exercises to identify risk against business continuity. Are we back doing that? It was going to be restarted in 21. I'm just looking at where I've written it here. It's on page 38. Sorry. Oh, right, okay. Sorry. 37, is it? Yeah. Yeah, desktop exercises were held on a regular basis prior to the pandemic. Thank you very much. To identify risk. Are we back?
If I may, through you, Chair, I'm not sure, Councillor Langmans. I'll need to check that with the Deputy Chief, with the Deputy Chief Executive. I can do that and get back to committee. No problem.
Another question. Just out of interest, how do we review shared services? Do we, to see whether they are working well for us or whether they're costing us?
Mr. Johnston.
It's quite difficult because actually in a number of our shared services we've gone into because simply there's a shortage of skilled work out there. For instance, if you think of legal services, trying to actually hire solicitors and attract solicitors down here and legally qualified people is actually very difficult. It's actually been made more difficult by the pandemic with now people working from home and can work predominantly from home, that people are sometimes prepared to, and I have to say we have benefited from this, travel longer distances, maybe once a week, to go into an office than they would have been prepared to commute on a daily basis. So, there is an inbuilt period of time. We don't go in on an indefinite basis. So there is an inbuilt review. But in many of them, it's very difficult to see any other option other than sharing what scarce resources are out there with other authorities and trying to make the best out of that.
Thank you. Any Councillor Cortell?
Thank you, Chair. Should we go into confidential session, would it be acceptable to talk about the risk concerning the potential salaries bill?
I think, Chair, if I may, I think it would be inappropriate to do that because we haven't had discussions with Unison on that, and I think it would be prejudging anything on that. The salaries bill is there, or the potential salary bill is something that we need to review. It is being considered by licensing and general purposes at their meeting later in September, I think. It's the 31st of August. Thank you, Louise. Yeah, so that would be appropriate. I think Tony has, in his report, has identified it around there is a risk of not only recruitment but in retaining good staff. So we need to look at that. I mean, if you look at the figures being bandied about, there will be budget implications, and what we need to do is assess what those are and advise members accordingly. And at this point, it's speculation until we've actually had the discussion with Unison.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Farmer.
Now, harking back to the previous discussion, shouldn't a statement on overall governance say something, at least briefly, about the review of governance for the separate company? It mentions the company's being set up, but mentions nothing about its governance. And this is meant to be a statement on governance.
If I may, because I think this is the annual governance statement for 2021-22, isn't it? Yeah, so it doesn't cover the current year. It's on 21-22.
The debate on the governance of the company has been going on well into last year, so it's still relevant.
I will definitely be looking for it on this year's one. I mean, this is the report of last year, but you're right, especially with the points you made earlier as well. And I have to declare that I'm an ex-director of it, and I share some of those. Yeah, flagged up for next year. Thank you. Councillor John Parr.
Yes, I'm already finding slight difficulty with the Constitution, which says we're to provide independent assurance of the adequacy of the risk management framework. I think what we have in front of us is a statement of emerging risks, but we haven't really had in front of us the risk management framework. I don't want to be pernickety because this is about last year, but can we just look at that in the coming year to see how we handle that particular assurance? Because that is very specifically our role. I think actually the handling of the principles is otherwise very good.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Mr. Baden's going to come back on that one.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As Malcolm said, and Councillor Barnes has acknowledged as well, this is a backward-looking document, not backwards and silly, but backwards and looking at 21-22. I'm happy to take any feedback about how we can improve the governance statement going forward, as with any other report that I do. So I'm more than happy to take feedback from committee and suggestions from members and this committee as to how we can improve the annual governance statement.
Thank you. Anybody else? So I was just making notes for myself for next year to make sure we included it. So that was for us to resolve approve the annual governance statement, and then that the statement be signed by the leader of the council and chief executive. Can I have somebody to move that, please? Councillor Portell, thank you. Seconded. Councillor Mrs. Mary Barnes, thank you. Those in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. Agenda item 8, which I think is Treasury Management Update Report. Mr. Baden again.
Thank you, Chair. The highlight of the meeting, I feel, the Treasury Management Update for Q1. So the report just simply asks members to note the report. First of all, I have to start off with an apology and a thank you to Councillor Barnes. There is an error in the table in paragraph 10. The variance should read 600,000 and 600.7 thousand pounds as a overachievement of rental income. Well spotted again, Councillor Barnes. It's not very easy to get things past yourself, and I apologise, members, for that error. I should just say, though, that the rest of the data in that table in paragraph 10 is correct. So, again, apologies for that. So, this is the quarterly Treasury Management Update. And again, I say this every meeting, but it's worth repeating. I think it's a requirement of CITFA and DLUHC. They have various codes of practice that we comply with, and this is why this report is brought to members. So, we did the the 21-22 Treasury Management Report. This came to Audit and Standards Committee last month, in fact. There's not an awful lot has changed, in truth, since the end of 21-22, but I'll pick out a few highlights, if I may, Chair. Investment performance is still around the 3.5 to 3.7% mark. The one thing that has changed from 21-22, which I was able to explain to Overview and Scrutiny Committee and Cabinet the other night, is that we are expected to get investment income on call accounts this year, which we didn't get last year. We think we're going to get about £190,000. Last year we got, I couldn't say off the top of my head how much we got, but it was a fairly small amount. And the reason for that was because the interest rate on most of our call accounts was very, very low. It's about 0.01 to 0.05%. Well, those rates, whilst interest rates going up in general is a worry for us, and from a borrowing perspective, it does mean that we do get a bit more money on our call accounts. So a little bit of a good news story there. I just want to pick up on the capital financing requirement, if I may, and also to pick up on a point that Councillor Cortell was good enough to raise with me earlier today. So the capital financing requirement is how much of the council's capital expenditure is financed through borrowing. Now it's quite low at the moment. I think we have about £27 million as the balance, 25, 26, £27 million, and it will ratchet up during the year, we hope, as the council's capital programme activity increases. Another thing I want to point out on net financing costs, we expect that to be about 5.69% of our revenue stream, which is about 4.33% higher than 21-22. And again, that's because we are expecting the increase in capital activity and therefore an increase in borrowing activity during the current financial year. But it is lower than the budget due to the pace of the capital programme. And it's probably the one KPI that all the KPIs are important in this report, Chair, but the net financing cost is I think a good one for members to keep an eye on, because what it's saying is this is how much of our income we are using on financing loan debt. So it's a good, as that figure gets higher, it becomes a little bit more of a risk to the council. So it's a good stat for members, I think, to keep an eye on. Property and non-property investment assets, again, they're expected to perform well, and I've already touched on the overachievement of income there, and that's mainly due to the rent income that we're now getting from Buckhurst Place. And to finish off on well, I'm not really sure how to finish off on the economic outlook, Chair, because it just becomes increasingly difficult to try and make any sense of it. It continues to be very uncertain. I think the one thing I would like to say, and I have said this to Overview Committee and Cabinet as well, is that we're soon to be undertaking a review of the medium-term financial plan, and that doesn't sit necessarily within the remit of this committee, but the consequences of the medium-term financial plan clearly are reported to this committee. So we are looking to do an affordability review and so forth. So the reason for the affordability review, it's something that we do every year, but it's been brought into, it's much more urgent this year, I think, as a result of the economic outlook. And I think trying to predict the budget this year is difficult enough as it is at the best of times, but it's going to be a real problem this year, because there are just so many uncertainties in the economic outlook. For example, the Bank of England are still forecasting that they will get inflation down to its target rate of 2.5% to 3% by, I think they said by 23/4, something like that. But it's, as you can see, it's a very uncertain picture, and of course you have other global issues such as war in Ukraine that fuels that uncertainty. So there's really not an awful lot I can say about the economic outlook. I don't think that's going to be particularly helpful to members, other than it's very uncertain and will continue to be so for some while. And happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Baden? Mr. Farmer.
My normal, simple technical ones, Tony, if you will. On that table on non-treasury investments. I'm just a bit surprised. I'm used to bracketed figures being negative, and this is clearly positive. So why are they in brackets?
There is no answer to particular reason why, Patrick. I'd have to go back to and check the signing convention that we use on our other reports. I try to be consistent across the board, so I can't. I write these reports it's seemingly all day long for my entire life, and I can't answer that question directly.
We all agree they are positive.
I will check. They do represent overachievements of income, and I will check that back with our signing convention.
Right. The second one is the property funds. I don't know whether you just didn't get an update, but the local authority property fund, CCLA, it can't be the same in March as it is in June. So I don't know whether that's just an error or they haven't given you an update.
No, through you, Chair, for me, it's not, it's not an error. We didn't have the update. And the reason we didn't have the update is because I wanted to get Q1 reported to this committee. I mean, if you think about it, I had to write the report before Q1 had actually finished. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I felt it was important that members had up-to-date information as much as possible. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been reporting Q1 until the end of September, which would have been near the end of Q2. So, sorry, I should have explained that at the beginning of the report, but it's a very good point. It isn't an error. It's just the latest information that we had available at the time. We had it from Hermes. We didn't have an update from CCLA.
Okay. And my final one, a very positive one. Lloyds are really paying you 1.15. That is amazing for a call account from what we were getting before. That isn't a mistype. That is definitely 1.15%.
It is a good rate. I will check it, but it does.
It's remarkable, I'm saying, for a call account.
Yeah.
So,
sure.
if it's right, great.
I will check that, given the error that Councillor Barnes found on the paragraph on table 10. But I will check that and come back.
Thank you.
Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I think this is pretty encouraging stuff in terms of income, and that's crucial because, as you can see, that's an important part of our financial stability programme. I did ask our Chief Finance Officer earlier in the day about the figure for savings in the financial stability programme, whether it was net or gross, because, of course, we cover at least part of the savings that we're looking at through the Bexhill special contribution and the Rise special contribution. I can't remember if there's a Battle one as well. No, they're just the two of them. So I think it would be a good idea if we can be clear whether that is a net figure or a gross figure. I suspect Tony can't answer tonight, but I'd look for an answer. The other thing I couldn't quite see was where, on our current borrowing portfolio, where the site opposite the town hall figures, because I would have thought we were borrowing to cover the purchase of that. So just a couple of questions. But I think, really, I'm quite encouraged, particularly the way our property fund on Treasury management is still actually holding up quite well. Likely, I think, to go on for a little while, although the danger of a recession in property must be looming slightly. I agree with the Chief Finance Officer about the financial prospects. Change of Prime Minister could actually drive interest rates up, even as it drives tax rates down. And that obviously is very worrying to local government, particularly with a large capital commitment coming online.
Thank you, Mr. Bain.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The change in Prime Minister absolutely exemplifies why this is a tricky, why the economic outlook in the report is tricky to write, because I think the Prime Minister at the time of writing this report was still Boris Johnson. So that's the problem with trying to do the economic outlook paragraph. There are a couple other points that Councillor Barnes made. The recent acquisition in the, I think you're referring to the second table in Appendix B, the borrowing portfolio. When we don't actually now, in the past when we weren't making many acquisitions, and this actually predates my time, but when we weren't making many property acquisitions, we were going out and borrowing on a needs basis, if you like. So we went to purchase a property and we borrowed for that particular property. We've not done that. In the bottom two lines of that table, I've said various, and the reason for that is because we didn't go out and borrow for the sake of funding the purchase of Buckhurst Place. In fact, we took that borrowing out a long time before we actually acquired Buckhurst Place. The reason we took that out, as I've explained to members before, is because we wanted to lock in cheap borrowing. So it wasn't actually a case of earmarking a chunk of borrowing for a particular asset purchase. So I've tried to move away from it in the table, and that's why you can't see it there. It is in there, but it's not explicitly laid out, and it's difficult really to know how to play it going forward. I just think that the other thing that's quite difficult to try and lay out in this table, of course, is that we often use, or we have used, rolling funds, if you like, to fund capital expenditure. We've called it internal borrowing. So it becomes tricky trying to match loans to individual asset purchases, which is why I use the cop-out phrase various, I'm afraid. The other point that you were asking about, Councillor Barnes, I might need to talk to you afterwards because I still don't quite understand what you're getting at with regards to special expenses. Was it in respect to the net financing costs indicator?
My worry is when we're looking at a financial stability programme and we're saying we're trying to save 1.7 million, if you're foregoing revenue at the same time, does that mean that we're saving less than 1.7 million in that programme because 800,000 odd will vanish from our income, or is the 1.7 net of that loss of income?
Okay, thank you, Chair. It's not specifically an issue in that's picked up in this report, but to try what I hope answers your question. Excuse me. There are, as you know, there is a proposed devolution programme of particular services to towns and parish councils. Not all of those services are at the moment subject to special expenses. There's only a few of them. The largest one is the grounds maintenance at Bexhill and Rye. There are other much smaller items, bus shelters, for example. We are aware, we do report the financial stability programme figures on a gross basis, but we are also aware, or I'm certainly aware anyway, of the income line decreasing or being impacted by that devolution equation, if you like. Hopefully that's...
I think really what I'm looking for, Chairman, is a degree of clarity around what that figure represents. And it won't be just for this committee, it will be oversight and scrutiny, overview and scrutiny as well. We'll need to know what we're aiming at this year. Hopefully with the income improving, we may actually need, we might get into balance a little sooner, but I'm not optimistic about that at the moment because we're going to borrow more and therefore our servicing costs of debt is going to be an outgoing. So it's getting certainty about what the figures actually mean I think is quite important, given the very tight financial situation that we're facing.
Thank you. And just having looked over Tony's shoulder, there's a very copious note just gone in his book about that.
And yeah, I mean, I can reply in more detail to Councillor Barnes if that helps. Yeah.
Councillor Cortell.
Thank you, Chair. I fail to understand what Councillor Barnes is getting at concerning a loss of income. I mean, the Bexhill special expenses, as Mr. Baden has pointed out, are mainly grounds and parks in Bexhill. In addition to that, there's Bexhill Museum, where it's simply an outgoing with no income. There's...
I think, whilst you're making valid points, I think we strayed off of this. I know Councillor Barnes brought it up, but this is not strictly on the Treasury Management update. I think it's more for somewhere else.
The reason I'm stating this is because anyone who's listening on the outside could get the impression that we'd be losing income on handing over special expenses, when in fact it's not the case. So I'm just trying to clarify that for any public viewing.
Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, if I may, just to, I was going to say close this one off. I hope I'm not wishing to cut members short. I think what Councillor Barnes is referring to is we collect some 680,000 in special expenses. We spend some 1-point-something million. What Councillor Barnes is saying is you're saving of 1.7 million. If you make the 1 million, is it 600 or 700,000 on top of it, or have you acknowledged the fact that we will no longer collect special expenses, so therefore our income will be down? So that's, I think, what Councillor Barnes is saying, is that it's a balance. So on one hand, we collect 600, and I think it's 680, don't quote me on that figure, and spend something like 1.7 million or something like that. But, excuse me. I think the short answer to it is it has to be the saving to the council's budget has to be 1.7 million. That's what we're looking for clarity. It is not about, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure whether I was going to use net in the right way in that way. So the saving the council is looking to make to its bottom line is 1.7 million.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Councillor Cortell.
Thank you for explaining that, Mr. Johnson. A very small point I wanted to make. The property fund, which Mr. Farmer was inquiring about, there is a note at the bottom which explains that it will be updated once the quarterly customer statement has been received, and that is why it was showing the same figure for March and June. I just thought I'd point that out.
Well spotted.
Thank you.
The other point, I seem to recall in my first week as a councillor, I was struggling with precisely what Mr. Farmer was struggling with about the positive and the negative, and it basically explained to me that local government works on precisely the opposite of the private sector, which I'm also used to in terms of showing income and expenditure.
Thank you. And I think what Mr. Farmer's questions highlighted is that we've turned that on its head again as well. Mr. Baden's still out.
I should point out, Chair, that I understand the confusion. Paragraph 11 does say that it does make reference to additional income. So hopefully that did clarify things to an extent.
Thank you. Councillor Langlands.
Thank you, Chair. Tony, this is probably a very silly question, but it's coming anyway. When you take out loans various, do you have projects in mind? I mean, that's a really low interest rate. Is there any limit to what you can take out on that interest rate? Because it seems to me I would have doubled it, but I don't know whether that's feasible.
Thank you, Chair. That's a very good question from Councillor Langland. Somebody's trained you very well in Treasury Management, if you don't mind me saying so. There is a limit because we borrowed as much as we could, and the limit is your capital financing requirement figure. You're not allowed to go, or you're strictly speaking not allowed to go over that. You can go fractionally over it as long as your capital plans, your capital expenditure eventually catches up. And the reason for that is because as a local council, we're not allowed to borrow what's called borrow in advance of need. Now, that's a fairly grey area in the regulations, but being the cautious type of person that I am, I aim for the capital for the council to be on the capital finance hitting its capital financing requirement figure. Now, we've overtaken our CFR figure now is higher than our loan portfolio, our debt portfolio. For argument's sake, it's not going to happen, I'll stress, but just for argument's sake, if rates then dropped again to these really low rates, 1.6%, I'll be taking out more borrowing because it's such a low rate, as you quite rightly point out. So that's how the thinking works. The rates suddenly dropped. We had an opportunity. We knew that we weren't borrowed right up to our CFR limit, so we locked it in, and it will save the council over a 50-year period. Which we're not going to see, but over 50 years it will save the council a lot of money, hopefully.
Well done, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Portell.
Thank you. Somebody mentioned the change of Prime Minister and the risk. I am very concerned about that. I'm not trying to be party political here, but there is one of the two remaining candidates who plans to lower tax by so much that I can see the pound falling to overnight to the level of the euro.
I shall leave that as a statement. I shall leave that as your statement, one of them.
I was going to
because
carry
you're going
on.
to stray into party politics, and we won't. Thank you very much.
Relevance to this committee is there are two economic strategies. Both probably would work, and both have reputable economists on side. But one will undoubtedly push interest rates higher, and that's a very relevant consideration for us as a council that is about to engage in borrowing quite large sums of money. And I'm rather with Councillor Langlands. I think we should go to the limit of what we can do, and that little bit of grey area beyond if we can. And I think that should be a policy steer which the Cabinet look at.
We can take that. I'll come to you, Mr. Baden, but I've got the impression that's what you do already. But yes, whoever wins, we have to play with what we get given. So after September, we will find out.
This must affect the risk register considerably.
Chairman, can I make a point?
Yeah.
The issue of who is Prime Minister is an issue, and that's what it is. What we need to deal with is any risks that come out of that issue. There's nothing we can do about it, speaking as, unless you're a Conservative member and you have a right to vote in the election, of course, but there's nothing we can do about it. All we can do is deal with the consequences of it. National political change is always something that appears on a risk register because it is, but it's not something we can do anything about other than respond when it happens. And as Tony says already tonight, one of the difficulties we have at the minute for a variety of reasons is, our MTFP, the medium-term financial plan, is a 5-year plan. I think I said to Tony it was getting difficult to predict anything over about 5 weeks. Tony, I think, corrected me down to about 5 days at the minute. But all we can do at any point in time is make our best, it's not a guess, it's our best informed opinion of what we know at that point in time and what we can see happening. I would dearly love to borrow loads of money at that rate, by the way, Councillor Langland. I think we might get a visit because I think it's actually not legal to do it anyway, to borrow just to invest. And so, yeah, it might be an issue the Audit Committee would want to look at if we were borrowing at that rate.
Right, so there have been no other questions. We resolved that we note that report. Moved by Councillor Langlands, seconded by Councillor Cortell. Thank you. Those agree? Those approved? 4, I mean. Thank you. Unanimous. Thank you. And moving on to the work programme. Agenda item 9. Is there a lot to be said on the work programme?
Chairman, if I may, following the earlier discussion, you may want to sort of pencil in at this stage, but the discussions with Joe to reflect the governance of the housing company. One other issue I was going to raise, and I'm not sure it's possible to do this, but we had a very useful, and Tony referred to it earlier, it was actually 2 sessions from Zurich Municipal on risk and how you assess it and how you deal with it. I'm looking to Tony, but if we could try and get it, it's probably not part of the work programme, but perhaps a briefing for Audit Committee members on what came out of it, because it's quite an interesting perspective. I mean, the main one being is you can't avoid it. So what you have to do is manage it, but it's about the criteria. So if that would be something that would be useful, we can go away and do some work on that and see whether we can. I would suggest a briefing would probably be better than a formal report to Audit Committee.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, just following up what the Chief Executive said. I think probably it would be useful to have an update on the Rother District Council Housing Company governance monitoring on the 26th of September. That's a neutral phrase. It doesn't suggest that it will necessarily be complete at that stage. If we have an update, it allows for us to take stock.
Yeah, thank you. I know when you referred to penciling it in, I thought I've already inked it in. But, any other comments on the work programme? Go on, Councillor Langlands, if you must.
If this makes any sense at all, really. The lottery, the Rother lottery, what? Do we ever look at that and see how it's working, or is that something we wouldn't get involved with?
I think the question is who looks at, and we'll find out who looks at, rather, because I'm sure it's not this committee, but somebody must look at it.
Would they?
But we'll leave that as a question for.
I just wonder how we look at that.
I'm looking at Tony, but I mean, you know, who's deliberately looking away from me at that point in time. But I mean, I would imagine that as it starts to produce an income for the council, that would be reflected in our budget updates that Tony would do. I mean, I would, at the minute, it's actually off to a very, very good start, and it's well ahead of where we expected it to be. I mean, a lot of what we've done is we've gone with the market leader, if you like, in local government lotteries for dealing with that. So, but I would imagine it will start to come through in those monitoring reports. But
so through you, Chair, it's more in terms of the detail and the timing. It's more a question for Ben. But we'll obviously, if we get significant sums coming through, then yes, it will be picked up in the monitoring reports.
Thank you. See, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Right, in that case, that's the end of the work programme, and I'm going to read what that says here. I was told to say, once we officially close the meeting at 8:19. So you can stop the webcast. Thank you.